Oh wow, this is not really made for vertically challenged. We'll just pretend you can see all of me. Good morning. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you to the EACD for the invitation, to Herbert, to Luca, and thank you to all of you for taking the time to be with us this morning. I am going to be preaching to the converted for the next few minutes, so do forgive me. And this makes it switch. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when I say Volkswagen? Engineering, tradition. Exactly, I'm hearing it. More likely, you're thinking emission testing fraud and the rather unempathetic way in which the company responded to being found out. Apologies to anyone who had anything to do with Volkswagen. And when I say BP, are you thinking beyond petroleum? Are you thinking sustainability? Are you thinking superb engineering company? Or are you still thinking Deepwater Horizon oil spill and the way the company handled itself in the aftermath? When I say Nike, are you thinking slave wages, awful factory conditions, forced overtime? Or are you thinking progressive, transparent company that takes a stance on healthy lifestyles? Volkswagen's issue was a governance issue. No question about that. But the way they chose to handle the stakeholder management afterwards contributed to about 30% of market cap loss. BP handled the oil spill crisis in a catastrophically bad manner, with the CEO offering no apology, no empathy. And by 2013, BP had dropped from the second largest oil company to the fourth largest in the world. Nike, on the other hand, after it was revealed in the late 90s that the factories that supplied them actually made people work in awful factory conditions, although it was slow to react at first, afterwards, through a very carefully planned engagement effort, today has made transparency a part of its brand and actually regularly publishes reports on the working conditions across its entire supply chain. Today, according to a think tank that focuses on the impact of reputation on business, Nike's reputation contributes to about 41% of its market cap. That's a whopping $33 billion US. It's only behind Apple, Google, and Walt Disney in that regard. Now, in today's world, where there are no borders and there's free flow of information, news and images travel fast, anyone can express an opinion. As you all know, perhaps more painfully than others, anyone can have a good or bad impact on reputation. And why is this important? Because reputation matters. In fact, according to the World Economic Forum, 25% of market value of a company can be directly attributed to its strength of reputation. And almost 90% of business leaders surveyed actually say that reputational risk is more important than almost any other business risk. And who holds the key to reputation? Now, of course, it's the collective responsibility of the leadership team. However, for one person, it's their job. It's their job to develop and enhance the company's reputation. And that's all of you in this room. That's the corporate affairs director, and I know there are many different titles in the audience and in the ecosystem, but for the purposes of this conversation, I will refer to all of you and the track you're on as the corporate affairs director. Now, the corporate affairs director is no longer the spokesperson in an organization who simply transmits internal messages to the outside world. Its role has shifted significantly. Today, it's the key senior leader who actively manages the two-way dialogue between the company and its ecosystem. And that dialogue determines reputation, and that dialogue determines the license to operate. So today, perhaps more than ever, a corporate affairs director needs to be part of each major business decision to gauge how it will be communicated and perceived by a complex set of stakeholders. And with an influential corporate affairs director in seat, perhaps Volkswagen and BP's emergence from the crises that they faced would have been slightly differently. Now, because reputation is so important to the growth or even the survival of a company, there's a stronger emphasis on having more senior corporate affairs director in leading companies. Herbert and I were just talking about this the other day. In the FTSE 100, 75% of corporate affairs directors report to the CEO. In the Fortune 500, 43% do. And if you look at the percentages sitting on the executive committee, again, in the UK, it's 45%. In the US, it's 34%. In continental Europe, it's about 25%. What's worrying is in Asia, it's only 7%. And that's something you may want to continue to talk to your Asian colleagues and peers about. Now, leading companies can no longer manage the stakeholder landscape through standalone engagement efforts. Reputation management today, as we heard earlier today too, requires a fully integrated communications approach with a consistent strategy across all communication channels, across all areas of the business, in all geographies. And this means the corporate affairs directors need to have the skill set to match. For the top jobs, businesses are looking for candidates who have spent time holding the entire corporate affairs mandate, from media to public policy, from CSR to financial communications, and even bleeding into investor relations. Agility is an increasingly valued trait as silo working is replaced by more flexible job roles. All successful corporate communicators need to stay aware of macroeconomic and industry developments and continue to add to their skill set. Again, not just from a functional perspective, but also adding to their understanding of commercial implications. And as you all know, communications directors or corporate affairs directors are no longer sole traders. Right? They have increasingly wide and varied teams working with them, requiring true leaders occupying that #1 seat. So the businesses are looking for natural leaders who can manage change, who can inspire their colleagues to work towards a particular vision. So as such, what is required of the successful leaders of any function today and tomorrow, in my opinion, in Egon Zehnder's opinion, in our opinion, are required from the corporate affairs leader as well. And this is a shift in how search firms are evaluating you against the roles that you're going to take on next. Now, at Egon Zehnder, we've devised a framework through which we assess the leaders of an organization. And this framework is beyond past experience or competencies. This is about the fundamental pillars on which leadership needs to rest. And if an organization is to survive and thrive in a future world, at the risk of sounding trite, where change will be the only constant. So our assertion is, just as a CEO needs to think about where they are across these 5 dimensions I'm about to share with you, so does a corporate affairs director, so do you. Firstly, tomorrow's leaders must be able to master complexity, right? Integrating perspectives of multiple stakeholders, whether internal or external, to help drive necessary change. It's especially vital for you guys. It's especially vital for the corporate affairs director to be able to distill the implications of an ever-changing landscape and drive simplicity on which the corporation can act. Secondly, these leaders need to be able to orchestrate creativity, encouraging a culture of ideas, innovation, problem solving from all levels of the business, not just the C-suite. Both for internal engagement and change, but also to engage with the external stakeholders in an ever-evolving way. Third is the ability to leverage emotion. The ability to leverage emotion to drive change. In an increasingly digitalized and automated world, where honestly, I wonder sometimes if my 5-year-old and my 7-year-old will ever be able to read human cues when they grow up, the field of corporate communications has an advantage in that it relies on the ability to understand how people think, understand how people speak, understand those human interactions. A unique spike in the corporate affairs directors, and one which we really encourage you to cultivate consistently. The fourth requirement for tomorrow's leaders is to define the broader purpose for which the organization stands. We've all been hearing the buzzword purpose-driven organization, mission-driven organization, etc. We believe that without this, companies will crumble and fall going to the future. Without the ability to anchor the business in society going forward, organizations will be unable to obtain and retain their license to operate. Corporate social responsibility, no longer the 2-page in the annual report that someone writes the night before it goes into publication, it's now an important element in business strategy. And owning this agenda further augments the importance of the role that you guys play in the C-suite. And the final critical feature of business leadership that has implications for the function is the requirement to nurture and develop future talent in order to give business strength and depth of the talent pool. Now, this is even more important in this time when the function is transforming itself, so the appetite and ability to invest in proper succession planning is key. Now, this all sounds very lofty and fantastic, and intellectually we can all get our heads around it. Practically, however, the success criteria for a future leader are rather complex and varied in a business as a whole, but especially in our evolving function. So then you might ask, okay, well, how do we spot talent? Now, this is where systematically assessing for potential comes into play. Over the years, the search firms and HR teams focused on past performance when making appointments. Had they created value in other jobs? What was the KGAR that you were responsible for? You know, I used to think of myself so innovative, and I said, well, what's the one thing you want to hang your hat on? Or what are you most proud of? What experience do they have? Then the industry came up with competencies, and you're all familiar with them: strategic orientation, commercial acumen, collaboration, influencing. Those of us who wanted to put icing on the cake rounded out the readiness assessment by thinking through culture fit, personality fit, etc. However, this still felt static to us, because this was looking backwards. At best, this was looking at today. So we figured by focusing on deciphering potential for a CEO, we could easily work backward to potential for other levels and functions. So those qualities somebody displays, and I'm not just talking about potential when you're 18. One of the people that I assessed recently who had the most potential of anyone I assessed recently was an 85-year-old founder of a family company. Potential describes the ability to successfully take on larger leadership roles in both scale and complexity, and the speed with which one can do so. So traits and motive comprise potential. And here I am giving the deep, dark secrets of Egon Zehnder away, but we're among friends, right, Richard? So those traits are curiosity. Does the person seek out new experiences, ideas, knowledge? But more importantly, are they curious about themselves? Do they proactively seek feedback and change their behavior in response to it? The second one is insight. Do they proactively gather and make sense of a vast range of information, discovering new insights when applied can actually transform past views and set new directions? So, creating vision. Number 3 is engagement. Do they engage in emotions, in logic of others, to communicate a persuasive vision and connect individuals to the leader and the organization? And finally, it's determination. And this is not dogged tenacity. This is keeping on driving to achieve the vision despite challenges while continuing to look for disconfirming evidence. So a curious mind with a hunger to learn, who can connect the dots with tenacity while appealing to hearts and minds, is a future leader. Now, each one of you in this room has the luxury and the responsibility of operating in an increasingly important function, which with the right leader in seat can have long-lasting impact on individuals, corporations, and more importantly, on society. At Egon Zehnder, we believe that going forward, you will all be occupying more executive committee seats and will be more consistently asked to join boards in your future careers as non-execs, the way the group HRDs have been asked increasingly in the last few years. It's my commitment to you that we will continue to partner with our clients, both in the public and the private sector, in helping them recognize the vitality of this role. It's also my commitment to you as Egon Zehnder that we're ready to partner with you as you think about your own development so that you're the best version of yourself against the 5 pillars I just spoke about. My ask of you, in the meantime, is that you score yourself in your own time, in the privacy of your offices, against the potential model. And if you're not where you want to be on one dimension, ask yourself why. But be very, very self-critical. And please see how you want to invest in yourself and move the dial. Because genuinely, more than reputation depends on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you to the members of the board of the EACD, to Herbert, Luca, and my colleague Gizem for your very interesting remarks. I'd like to give you Korn Ferry's perspective, and I think actually there's a lot of similarities with what Gizem just covered. In terms of context, as a former practitioner for 20 years and then now being in search for 10 years, I would say that I think that this is the best time ever to be in this profession. We do searches for a wide range of communications roles, but most of what we focus on is the Chief Communications Officer. And what I wanted to share with you this morning is some of the insights that we've gathered from the CEOs and boards that we've worked for, as well as some of the research that we've conducted, not only with European Chief Communications Officers, but Fortune 500 CCOs as well. I think based on our work across all industries and geographies, as well as the research that we've done, let me give you the headlines in terms of what we're seeing and why I'm so optimistic about the future for this role. First of all, we're seeing an increased stature for the function among the C-suite and boards. More and more organizations are understanding the power and the influence that this role has, and the critical importance, not only in playing defense, but also in playing offense. Secondly, we're seeing that CEOs' expectations are increasing for this role. They want more, they need a trusted advisor inside the C-suite that is looking at the world and interpreting that on the inside. Third, and I think this will come as good news hopefully for most people, is that compensation is increasing as well. We're seeing that as the role elevates, so are the compensation packages. They're not necessarily at the same level of other C-suite roles, but we're getting closer, and I think that's a very positive development. Fourthly, I would say that we're seeing that the roles are broadening and the function is morphing. And a lot of times we get the question, what does best in class look like? And the reality is that there is no best in class. It depends on the organization, depends on the industry, and it depends on where they are in the life stage. But we're seeing different iterations in the top role, whether it's the combination of communications and marketing, or it's the combination of public affairs and communications, or potentially investor relations, communications, and public affairs. So we're seeing different iterations, but the broader trend is that the roles are getting bigger. And lastly, I would say is that we're seeing what we're calling, for lack of a better word, an emerging Uber Chief Communications or Public Affairs Officer. And what we mean by that, these are what I would call as power players, bigger players that have a bigger scope of responsibilities. and have greater influence inside the organization. And actually, we have a paper that we released late last year that's available on our website, which we interviewed a number of these people, and that may be an interesting read for you. So what's driving this? I think a couple of the speakers have talked about this, and Gizem touched on it as well. But the reality is we're living in the age of disruption, whether it's the crisis of different brands that it's inevitable that every brand is going to go through. But it's the age of disruption. There are business disruptors. Every industry is being impacted in their categories. They're redefining the old conventions. There's activists that are stirring the pot. They're noisy, they have agendas, they can disrupt your game. And they're also smart, savvy, and know how to gain the attention. And it's a fact of life. It probably keeps your CEO or the boards up at night. And there's also the disruption of information. It's a fragmented world. There's more channels, there's more noise. It's real time, it's 24/7. And you're not sure what's the news, what's not. All of your stakeholders are being drawn into this complicated vex of information. So it's really, we believe, against this backdrop that CEOs are increasingly having to operate more like political officials, in that they may have a strategy of where they want to take their organization with goals and objectives, but increasingly they're subjected to outside forces that can hijack the agenda, can change the game, and can disrupt the business. And it's, as our previous speaker mentioned, it's an increasingly transparent world here. And it's a vocal world with stakeholders having a voice. And it's not so much about spinning as may have been the rap on communications people in the past. It's about being sort of an honest broker of the truth and information and being transparent. And you can no longer be tone deaf to all the different stakeholders. And while boards and CEOs have always understood I think the basics of communications, increasingly I think they're turning to these leaders now to play the role of strategist, and strategist in defining what the offensive game is. What's the new narrative? Where do you fit in a increasingly competitive, disruptive landscape? And in the past, this may have been more of the role of marketing, but we don't think that that's so much the case anymore. Our views are, frankly, that CEOs are agnostic. They really don't care who owns the agenda, and they don't necessarily care about organizational structures. Instead, what they're really looking for is a go-to person. They want somebody that understands the business, somebody that thinks like a business person, and somebody that can build the relationships inside the organization to help solve some of these complicated challenges. These are a few of the organizations that we've done searches for, CEOs that we've worked with over the last few years. And it's a good cross-section, I think. It's certainly not comprehensive. But Alibaba, the Chinese internet e-commerce company, PepsiCo, the beverage and snack company that has $22 billion brands, KPMG, and most recently Heineken. And what we've heard from what I'll call the voice of the CEO, and I think this is important because this is where things are beginning to shift, is that there are some key competencies that they're looking for in these roles going forward. Specifically, they're looking for seasoned advisors that have high credibility and outstanding business judgment. And this gets to the business acumen I think that Gizem touched on and others have talked about as well. Being business savvy, having the financial acumen, having relevant experience. And I think one of the shifts that's happening is that it's less important what industry you're in, and it's really more important to the organizations that we're doing searches for as to what kind of relevant experience you bring. Different companies are at different stages, different life stages, and so they're looking for people in the top roles that have relevant experience, not so much industry experience. The broader functional skill set, Gizem talked about this, and I'll touch on this a little bit more in a second, is that the functional skill sets really now are just table stakes. That's the basics. You have to have those. But to elevate into the top role, it's really about having a broader set of leadership experiences and skills. And it's going to be the ability to have influencing and diplomacy skills that are critically important. And lastly, as I touched on, it's the notion of having a point of view and the ability to drive an offensive strategy, not just a defensive strategy. The Arthur Page Society, which many of you may be familiar with, is principally a US-based organization, although they're trying to expand more here, and I think there may be some members that are here in Europe. Recently, they had Jack Welch, the well-known CEO, as a speaker, and I thought it was interesting that even a management icon who's somewhat out of the public eye these days had a very specific point of view on the role of the Chief Communications Officer. And this was a verbatim quote that he had when he was interviewed. He said, "Chief Communications Officers used to be firemen, but the role is changing an incredible amount. Being CCO is no longer about putting out fires, it's much more forward-looking, and it's about making everyone around you smarter." And he talks about the relationship, the unique relationship between the CEO and the CCO, that it's all about total trust, being very intimate, understanding that the relationship is probably closer with the CCO than any other C-suite relationship because they know more about what's going on in the bowels of the company. And again, I think this is something that we're seeing as we talk to CEOs and boards more and more. From the voice of the sitting Chief Communications Officers, we've done some research. We did a European communications study. We did one with the Fortune 500. And I won't go through these in great detail, but it's really, if you look at what the sitting Chief Communications Officers are saying, the skills that are required are really a different set of skills than what have existed in the past. The whole notion of a strategic mindset, a global perspective, courage, the ability to drive engagement, and the ability to manage within ambiguity. And then also listed on here are some of the top challenges that Chief Communications Officers are facing. Reputational threats, the whole convergence of digital, social, organizational dynamics, building the right team, getting the right people, how to manage data analytics and shareholder activism. So, what does this mean? From our perspective, we believe that the demands of the operating environment and the increased expectations of boards and CEOs are going to require a redefinition of the skill set. And Gizem touched on this, and I happen to agree with many of the things that you talked about. I don't have a model quite as nice as the one that you laid out, but I think there are a lot of similarities. And our view is that the Chief Communications Officer is really in the best position to help advise the C-suite to navigate these uncertain times. There is really no other role that sits in the organizational structure or sits in the C-suite that is able to give a 360-degree perspective on all of the different stakeholders and be able to translate the outside world inward. And we believe, as I touched on a second ago, that as CEOs are beginning to behave more like political figures, that the Chief Communications Officers are also needing to shift their game from being press secretaries to more of the political strategist. And within that context, we're also seeing that some of the skills that have traditionally been a part of this are being sharpened. And it's important that Chief Communications Officers focus on these core competencies. And that's, again, these will probably be familiar to Gizem. It's Korn Ferry's take on it, but it's resiliency. It's the ability to pivot, to redirect, to thrive within a chaotic environment. Learning agility, the ability to take in new information, process that, reset, and recalibrate. The ability to collaborate, to work closely across all lines of the organization, to break down the organizational silos that may exist. to step up and be problem solvers. At the end of the day, this is what CEOs are really looking for, is they want people that are not focused on the org chart or head count or budget, but people that are willing to solve problems, to anticipate, to collaborate, and to solve problems. And I think the other thing is that we're seeing increasingly is that CEOs are saying to us that these roles have to have the courage. They have to be willing to be truth tellers. They have to speak truth to power and push back and be able to translate the outside world inward. The last thing that I would say is that as the role is elevating, what we're beginning to look at now from Korn Ferry's perspective, and in the top tier players that we're looking at now, is how do you elevate this role to the C-suite? And what's listed here are really sort of the price of admission C-suite competencies. And I think going forward, these are the things that chief communications officers will be measured on in the future. Things like business insight, the ability to drive results, the ability to manage complexity, decision quality, and the ability to instill trust. These are things that CEOs are viewed against. These are core competencies that chief executive officers are viewed as, and we think those are going to be translated to the role of chief communications officer as well. So in closing, we see the market conditions as being right to elevate and transform the function. Our point of view is that the value of the function has never been more important. The need has never been greater. Every industry is going through transformation and disruption. And this role, again, has a unique perspective in that it can offer a 360-degree perspective. And I think also providing the critical linkage between the organizational gaps, that's the opportunity to step up and to add value to a CEO and to the boards. So in our view, this is really an inflection point, I think, for the profession, and it's an exciting one. But to summarize this, I would say to meet the challenge, it's really about the role evolving from functional expert to a strategic business advisor. It's about the counselor or the public affairs director progressing from being a mouthpiece or production shop, good at a skilled trades craftsperson, if you will, to business strategist. And the leader in this role also needs to be an integrator, as I mentioned a minute ago, somebody that proactively understands the business, connects all the points of relevance to the business. And the CCO really needs to continue to grow its leadership skills in order to elevate and stay within the C-suite. And with that, I'll turn it over to Luca.
Thank you, Richard. And now let's see if I actually manage to come up with some questions that may engage an interesting conversation up here and maybe stimulate some even more interesting questions from our members. I jotted down about 1 zillion questions, but I don't think the time is going to allow for all of them to be asked. So maybe let me start with a question for Gizem, since she has been sitting down here with me for a little while now. And the question is that in both your presentations, you spoke about some of the important requirements of our positions, of our roles, whichever way you want to call it, because as Gizem was mentioning, there are so many different ways in which the chief communications officer is currently referred to. But I wonder, what are some of the other things, other elements that CEO are looking for in our role and that are sort of unspoken? And sort of a second part to that question is, what's the best way for us to find out, to gather this feedback as we go through a selection process?
I think more than any other function, this is the function when I'm taking the brief from the CEO. I say, look, we're looking for a human being as opposed to a functional leader. And I'm Mediterranean, so my heart usually kind of leaps forward whenever I do things, even in the business context. And initially, when my colleagues were hearing me say, oh, come on, it's Gizem, being all Mediterranean again. But it's actually very, very true. Because at the end of the day, when that final decision has to be made, when something really, really awful is happening, or when something really, really great is happening, the CEO needs to turn to this person, look them in the eye, and say, what do I do? And what do we do? And in that moment, it's not kind of how many years you've spent in an industrial company and how many years you've spent in a fast-moving kind of consumer goods company. It is you as a human being, with everything, with all of you that you bring to work that day, you're the trusted advisor to the CEO. That's why a lot of the times, kind of the recruitment processes for these roles actually take a very long time, because we spend an extraordinary amount of time, interview after interview, really trying to get to the crux of this person. So the human being element is the unspoken one. But where people talk about chemistry, and I hate talking about chemistry because it's so kind of nebulous, but it is the chemistry. And that you cannot do a lot about. What you can do to ensure that you kind of demonstrate that chemistry, or that you portray yourself as a trusted advisor to as many different types of CEOs, is again investing in yourself. Do you think that your empathetic skills are so developed that regardless of the style of the leader, you can be an impartial, trusted advisor to them? This is not about liking the CEO with whom you work. This is about you being able to put all of your unconscious biases to one side and be able to say, okay, I am going to be the most empathetic human being, and I'm going to put myself in the position of the CEO who has to make this decision. What is the most sound decision that I can help him make? And obviously, all of the skill sets that Richard has been talking about, or that I've been talking about, that all of you guys frankly know, around strategic orientation, constantly keeping yourself current. It's not just about reading about your industry. You need to have an opinion about what's happening in the world that day, and what's going to happen in the world in the next 3 months, and what's going to happen in the world in the next 6 months.
Thank you. I think it's Richard's turn to give us his take on this.
I agree with everything here. I think business judgment is the thing that CEOs are going to be measuring against. That's what they're going to be looking for. But I think it's also about a headset. It's about the idea of the chief communications officer thinking and behaving like a CEO, putting yourself in their shoes. What are the pressures that are at bear? Obviously, you need to be current with what's going on in the world, but how is your CEO thinking? What are the things that they are processing in terms of input? So being able to bring that point of view will allow you to develop, I think, chemistry. I know it's a controversial word perhaps, but allow you to bring a connectivity perhaps with the CEO, and also to earn their confidence in your judgment and your thinking and your strategic abilities.
Thank you. And this leads me to some sort of a follow-up questions in a way. I was reading a tweet from a member before. She wrote, quoting you, Richard, "Communications roles are getting bigger, being paid more, gaining more influence." I mean, it's good to be positive, of course, and that's, but it's also good to be, to be realistic. So with that in the background, at the other end of the spectrums, what are the risks, today that, that we face in our positions in terms of, competitions perhaps coming from, not from pure communications professionals, but from other areas of the business?
It's a good question. I think one of the risks is that if you don't step up, if you're not able to deliver in terms of the expectations of what the CEO or the board or the leadership team is looking for, you're at risk of being displaced. And that may be from Gizem and I getting a phone call to replace an incumbent, or it may be, frankly, that somebody within the organization is tasked with taking on the function. And so it could go to a chief administrative officer. I think there's potentially risk of talent coming in from outside of the profession. It could come from strategy. It could come from the thought leadership or the strategic advisory firms that there's a number of areas, but I think the risk is potentially that if you're not able to deliver to the expectations that the C-suite is looking for, that they'll find the person who perhaps may have less functional experience, but has greater business insight and experience, and you would be disintermediated.
No, I would tend to agree with that. So we're against kind of the agile organization model to start with. So the executive committee seats in number, they're decreasing. So your average CEO does not want to have 12 direct reports to them. So, on the one hand, Richard and myself and a number of our peers are constantly, working on elevating the role and ensuring that the organizational structure allows for you guys or demands for you guys to sit around the XCOM table. The XCOM table is shrinking. So you need to display the ability to be a business executive, which is what we've been talking about all this morning anyway. So you need to more than fill that seat. Now, filling that seat, and that seat's definition is not necessarily the communications director, it's the trusted advisor. It's the person bringing the outside in and bringing the inside out. That does not necessarily that role doesn't necessarily need to be filled by someone who came up from media relations, who came up from internal communications. To Richard's point, I'm looking at management consultants for certain corporate affairs roles. I'm looking at people who worked in multilateral organizations, thinking through political economic advice, etc., for certain types of roles. So your quote-unquote competition just tripled and quadrupled because the very definition of the role the organizations expect you to play is changing and morphing.
Thank you, and you just made it easy for me to pick the next question, which I think is a bit of a controversial question, or perhaps the way in which I intend to put it to both of you is a little bit controversial. Let's say for the sake of argument that I disagree with the whole idea that the chief communications officer should sit either on a board or on some type of extension of the board itself. And let's say that that I feel that the reason for that is that too many of us don't have enough business acumen, and this is typically one of the key characteristics of people that a CEO and a chairman wants to sit next to them in a board. We don't spend enough time truly understanding the business that we work for. And last but not least, most chief communications officers don't understand enough about numbers. So what's your position on this?
Richard?
Well, first of all, I don't think you don't need to be a numbers expert. You don't need to, the CEO is not necessarily looking for another chief financial officer. You don't need to have that level. But it's really...
Obviously, I didn't mean it that way, but really, I find that in our profession sometimes, the most basic skills, when it comes to numbers, are simply not there. I was speaking with a colleague yesterday, and just to get some, just a little bit of an idea of the organization he was working for, I asked for revenues. Mm-hmm. Caught a stare blank, a blank stare rather.
That's a problem. Yeah, no, I think having a general understanding about how the business operates, how you make money, what are your exposure points, it's really having sort of a higher level business acumen, not necessarily the deep dive details, but being able to think about it from a holistic standpoint. And getting smart and learning, not only in managing your function, but learning about how the business operates, where it's successful, where it's not, what are the what are the elements of the strategy that you're trying to move, where does leadership want to take the organization, and bringing that holistic thinking to that role.
But now, hold on, let me allow me, Gizem, not to let him off the hook so easily. So do you think that there, you see a lot of us, or a fair number of us, let's put it this way. Do you see more people who would actually belong based on that to a board or an extension of it, or just not enough, as I tend to think?
I would say probably not enough. So.
Very diplomatic answer. Yeah. How about you, Gizem?
And I will agree. I think, traditionally, this function has not been invested in the way that a finance function has been invested in, that a supply chain function even has been invested in, a general counsel function has been invested in, because for a general counsel track almost always requires you to have gone to law school, and that brought some kind of a common entrance point in terms of a basis off of which we're working. All of that having been said, one of the reasons why we are so keen on development, and development can happen at any point of someone's career, from an analyst position all the way up to the ex-com position. That is why we're spending an extraordinary amount of time investing in leadership development as opposed to just search, which I know Korn Ferry is also very keen to do, is to precisely to do this, because we believe in continuous learning. And frankly, no one's going to have to split the atom when they go into the ex-com. It is just about, as I said, being the best version of yourself. To Richard's point, having a good sense for how the business works, how the wider context works, and that you can do by continuously pushing yourself on your own development journey as a business executive. So when someone asks you, so we go through this coaching training at Egon, Zehnder on an ongoing basis, and I had one just the day before I came here. And one of the things that we did in the room was we would go around and we would ask each other in different pairs, who are you? And the thing you couldn't say was what your name was and what you did for a living. And after the fourth, fifth, sixth question, we got to a level of depth that you never would have gotten to by just having the hallway chat, eating croissants here. The croissants are lovely, by the way. But my ask of you is, when someone asks you who you are or what you do, pause for a moment. And before you say, I'm the communications director of X, or I'm the public relations director of Y, think about yourself as a business executive representing your company. You just happen to work in that function. And that mind shift right there for you is going to continue to have impact on how you show up in the business and how the business will perceive you. We need to do a bit of education internally for ourselves, but again, how we show up will continue to educate the corporations to which we belong.
That partially took away my next question, which is about, which was going to be about, it's easy to work on our trade skills, a little less easy to work on our leadership skills. So I wonder if perhaps, starting with Richard, you can tell us a little bit about, again, what do you recommend we do to work, train, improve our own leadership skills, and if to an extent, these are skills that can be trained, in everyone, or can only be trained on people who actually have a sort of a fair base to start with.
Sure. Well, I agree with Gizem. I mean, I think investing in your own development is absolutely key, and the continuous learning mentality is something that's really important. One of the things that I've seen with some of the successful searches that we've done is that people that have grown their leadership skills has come from taking on special projects within the organization or stepping into a void that exists. I think this is one of the interesting challenges with this function right now is that if you look at the organizational structure in most organizations, historically, it's pretty predictable. You've got a chief financial officer, you've got a general counsel, you've got a chief financial officer, and others. But a lot of the challenges, and Gizem talked about this a little bit, reputation. Who owns reputation in the organization? It doesn't sit in somebody's job description necessarily or within the organizational chart. So I think the opportunity for chief communications officers is to step up and problem solve and maybe lead a cross-functional team if it's not advocating for putting it on your own job description. You can get some skills and experience by stepping in and working with a cross-functional group and showing the leadership to the organization by bringing pieces of the organization together to solve a problem.
No, I agree. I mean, I think development can come in many different forms, and part of the development is going to Harvard to the AMP course. Part of development is coming to conferences like this where you network. So each conversation you have adds something to you. Part of it is experiential. There's the genuine opportunity to actually lead special projects in organizations in different geographies and different functions. And anyone who comes to talk to me about kind of career advice, that is absolutely one of the things I tell them they need to think about. But then the fourth point about leadership development is just that potential framework I just shared with you. Push yourself. And it doesn't have to be functional leadership development. It's you as a person. It's investing in your own curiosity. Do you push yourself to read more? Do you actually ask someone, how did I do? What did I do? Could I have done that better? And it could be after each meeting. So we do this. After each meeting, we turn to our colleague and say, how did I do? And in that moment, they tell you, you did great. Well, actually, you sounded a bit monotonous, whatever. And in that moment, we take that back. Or it's a difficult conversation. We all have difficult conversations in the office. Stepping into it and saying, can you tell me how I could have handled that better? Because leadership is not functional expertise. Leadership is not knowing 5 criteria for X framework or Y framework. It's you as a person who can genuinely get people on board with you. So curiosity about yourself, curiosity about the world, and engagement. True engagement. When you ask someone a question, you need to really, really listen to them. And I think we have traditionally got a lot of recognition for being able to make snap judgment and give advice in the moment. So next time you go to the office and someone's talking to you and asking you for advice, I really want you to see if you're really listening before you give the advice. These are the intangibles of leadership, which is what I look for when I'm recruiting a CEO. Or a non-exec.
Someone is telling me that I should probably turn it over to the audience, especially a couple of colleagues from the board. And which reminds me that I forgot how this works. Who's going to be passing out the mic? So now we have someone. Thank you. So, and I think there are a couple of questions up here, up front. There's Inge, who gets... Inge, be nice, all right?
Top.
You talk in a black part.
Wow,
yes.
this actually works. Thank you very much for very inspirational input that you've given us and challenges, actually. I'm Inge Ballage. I'm indeed on the board of the EACD. I'm trying to see if you've been explicit, but I don't think you've been. So I'm trying to see if I perceive something through my own lenses or through you. We talk about transformation of the function. We talk about a disruptive world. But isn't it true that the sectoral boundaries are blurring too? And I'm just wondering what your view is on that. And Richard, when I looked at, you've used activists and activism a couple of times. I think if you follow the narrative by Paul Polman, I'm not sure he's the CEO of a corporation or whether he's actually an NGO leader. And he's been challenged in that way, which I actually think is beautiful. So I was just wondering, in view of that, what does that mean in our function and overall for responsibilities of leadership, of leaders?
Well, a great question. I mean, I think in terms of the blurring of the lines, I think it's rare now that when we're doing searches for CEOs that they're looking for specific industry experience. It's what relevant experience do you have that is relevant to my business and to where we are. So, you know, I think the multi-industry experience, I think, is especially helpful. I think these skills are all portable and transferable. And I think in many ways, it can be more advantageous to bring somebody that has an outside perspective into an organization. So coming from outside of the industry, I think, is sometimes a very healthy choice. And when we're doing searches for clients, we'll look at both inside the sector and outside the sector, because we'll want to bring a different range of experience and different options for them. But you know, your point's well taken on the Unilever CEO, because I think increasingly, it sort of goes back to what I was talking about as CEOs, almost as political leaders. We're seeing more of that. Indra Nooyi at PepsiCo is also another person that has taken a very proactive stance on her whole performance with purpose, which is all about their CSR capability. And I think there are some forward-leaning CEOs like that, and I think we'll see more of those, because frankly, all of these organizations are global organizations with global stakeholders and are operating in an increasingly transparent global world. So I think we're likely to see some of the thought leaders like that transcend, and perhaps other CEOs move in that direction.
Gizem?
Yeah, I mean, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go a lot into it, but I do agree. I think this function, more than any other function, is a more fungible function. When it comes to very strict license to operate, where public policy, regulatory knowledge are super, super important, say in financial services or in pharmaceuticals, we will probably continue to have a bias for people who will have had exposure to those sectors. However, today, for any global number one search that we do or number two searches that we do, we never ever take sector as a criteria.
Anthony.
Good morning, Anthony. Is this working? Yes. I'm too close to it. I think it's okay.
Yeah.
Anthony Gooch from the OECD. Thank you very much for both of your presentations. They were complementary and similar in a number of respects. I want to ask a couple of questions on the world as it is today, first off. How do you think that other members of an ExCom, if that's where CCO lies, could adjust or even struggle with this evolution that is taking place? And I say it from personal experience in seeing how colleagues of mine at the equivalent of an ExCom in an international organization are adjusting to this notion of ownership of reputation, etc. And how are you feeling that that's playing out? Because I imagine that this is also very disruptive within companies, and those who may have felt that they had many of those roles before are being superseded somehow or pushed aside by the CCO. Any advice also in terms of how one manages that? A little bit more on the Uber function. It wasn't quite clear what was meant by that. Now, charting forward. Gizem, you mentioned agile business working, and I didn't hear it fully well, but if we imagine a world where we're actually moving towards different types of organizational structures, the CEO themselves, the ExCom themselves, what lifespan do they have? If we're looking towards agile business working, we're looking towards very different forms of human construct within corporations and others. I can see, and this is a comment now, I can see a very interesting role for people in our space, because we should have very high levels of emotional intelligence. So you've mentioned certain skills, like, and you've talked about chemistry. Yeah, nice
box, but I'm afraid it's not really doing the business. You've mentioned skills, you've mentioned qualities like chemistry that you found very intangible. I don't find those so intangible. I think people recognize them very, very clearly and easily, but they may be a little bit more sophisticated. What you often find is that you find people who struggle to get into those spaces. So they may have a very high intellectual intelligence, and they may have a relatively low emotional intelligence and empathy and a quality to be able to do the 360. So that's more a comment element in terms of what I see moving forward, but I imagine that you're thinking in the same realms.
I'm happy to just react to the first thing that you said. Will the rest of the ExCom feel threatened, or will they feel disturbed? One of the things that you guys do better than anyone, or should do better than anyone by job description, is collaboration and influencing. So I would be shocked if any one of you walked into an ExCom room and started acting super sharp-elbowed. The best communication director does not need to be the smartest person in the room. And even if they are, they don't have to prove that they're the smartest person in the room. So the way you engage in that room is going to define how successful you are in the first place. And by ensuring that you are making people around the room feel like you're going to help them do their job a lot better, you're going to earn that seat. And again, nobody necessarily owned specifically the stakeholder engagement. The CFO has been the financial conscience of the organization, but nobody really played back to the organization. This is what the world is saying about us. The CMO showed what the customers were saying. The supply chain person showed what the suppliers were saying, but nobody to this day showed the integrated view on, you know what, this is what the 17-year-old kid in Nigeria is worried about. And that is going to have an impact on us, because guess what? The guys in Brussels are reading what the 17-year-old kid is typing on Twitter. We're in a different world. So I think by you guys asserting yourself in a constructive manner, that tension will not be there. The only thing, as I said, that we're going to run into is the size and shape of ExComs. And there, one thing to do is to continue to think about the interchangeability of an ExCom seat with CEO direct reporting line.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think the whole emotional intelligence, the ability to integrate, collaborate, is something that this function has always been good at. And I think working the way into the ExCom role is something that you would just need to navigate through that. But in the reality, you're helping to solve problems for the organization, and you're helping to find solutions for complex challenges that chances are the ExCom is struggling with anyway. So if you're able to do that in a way that you can integrate and collaborate and bring those skills and create solutions, that's the value add, and that's where I think ExComs, even though there's pressure, I think to consolidate that, I think we'll see the value of this role.
Thank you both. I think we have time for one more question from the audience.
Brief one.
And I actually have one more question myself, and we'll wrap it up.
I'll be very quick, and no need to repeat how interesting this session has been. Thank you so much. Two things. This transformation, is it taking place equally for men and women in this industry? And what's next on this transformation? What's your one thing that you believe going to happen for us as practitioners in this industry? Thank you.
Easy questions, right?
Well, no, the first one I'll take, and the second one I'll give to Richard. This is a blessed function in terms of diversity, because traditionally we have given opportunities to diversity in all forms, and gender diversity is just one of them. So it gives me great pleasure every time we pull up a shortlist for any role in any geography. our lists compared to, say, the finance function or the chief information officer function, sadly for them, is the most diverse one. So we are actually in the luxurious space that I don't think we need to think about gender. I mean, we need to think about gender diversity or any kind of diversity as business executives, but I think the path is more clear in this function because there's precedent and great pipeline of talent.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And in terms of next step and transformation, just to be very quick, I think potentially the future of this role being able to serve on boards is something that is a possibility. There are a few instances in the United States that I'm aware of, but I think when you think about the skill set and what this role can bring, boards have changed their composition based on Reg FD in the US and financial disclosure. They've changed the composition of board. I don't think we're that far off from potentially having chief communications officers that would sit on boards and provide value add. I think that's maybe a little bit further down the road, but that's something that I would see potentially as the next step in transformation.
And similar thing happened with group HRDs. You know, 5 years ago, you wouldn't see a group HRD being appointed to a board, so a supervisory board in continental Europe. But now, it's almost impossible to think of a very large organization not asking for someone who comes from the talent space to help them with their REMCO and their NOMCO, Nominations Committee and Remuneration Committee.
And here's the very final question. You know, as hopefully everyone in this room knows, we celebrate this year our 10th anniversary as an association. And so the board has been focusing for a while now on what the next 10 years need to look like, what we need to focus or refocus on, and etc. I know that you both, you know, Richard and Gizem, you know, either participate actively or at least sometimes participate to the works of, you know, some associations similar to ours. From your perspective, from what you have seen over the years from our associations, you know, is there one each specific area that we are not focusing enough on, that we should really be focusing for the first time on? You know, what can we do as an association in the you know, next 10 years to really you know, provide our membership you know, an element of difference, something that it's really going to help them in their careers?
Well, there are great minds leading this association, and there are great minds who are all members of this association. So who am I to give you advice? But one thing I feel very passionate about is the leadership development bit. And it's not functional development, it's leadership development. So anything the association can do, anything you all can do, anything we can do to help representing our organizations in getting you to that next stage of being a phenomenal leader, being the best version of you that you can be, I would like to think that that's the investment I would love to see this group make. Because you're all brilliant in your functions anyway, right?
Well, thank you for that.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think leadership development is something that's key. And if you think back a few years ago, 10 years ago, human resources, before it was named human resources, was personnel. And it was all about sort of the basic function. And they've made the shift now to the boardroom, and the human resources function, I think, has gone through a similar transformation that we're going through. Yep. So I think focusing on the skills that you're going to need in the next 10 years and elevating this function to the same, in a similar way in which HR, I think, would be something that potentially would be very helpful and useful.
So Herbert, I think we have already a panel for next year on leadership development. And as you may recall, I had originally suggested to have a leadership coach sitting with us up here, which would have been really interesting. So thank you, Richard. Thank you, Gizem. Well, thank you for making the time to come out and talk to us. Now if I recall correctly, we're lucky enough to have a break after this, so there'll be an opportunity for those who haven't had a chance to ask questions, perhaps to ask more. And so, thanks again.